evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to one of the more important interviews I've ever done. I have with me tonight Melinda Leslie, who is a researcher who many will know as a researcher who does MILABs, experiencer, abduction type stuff. I know her a little bit different now. Melinda and I met last November and at a conference held by Paula Harris, the Star Wars conference, and Melinda wanted to get a hold of me, and I didn't know this about Melinda, so I want to set this up tonight, because if I didn't know, then I don't think anybody else knew, and that was that Melinda wanted to get a hold of me and talk to me about the Avery group, about a sort of an effort by government people to interact with the UFO community, UFO researchers in the UFO community who are maybe sometimes playing both sides of the fence, working for the government and doing research. And I didn't realize Melinda was working on this. I had worked on this for about 30 years. And so we had a meeting in Laughlin, and Melinda told me that she and her partner Randy Cocaine had been working on this for well over 20 years, maybe almost as long as I had. I was very surprised to sort of realize that she was working on this as well. And so she gave me 80 pages of notes that I had never seen before of her research. And basically she was picking off the same type of people that I was, said that she had the same names. And what was different between Melinda and I is that I almost never interact with the people, the high-level officials, the people that are interacting with the UFO community. I sort of sit on the sidelines and watch. Melinda, on the other hand, has interacted with quite a few high-level military people, intelligence people who have interacted with the UFO community. And in March, Melinda and I will be giving a series of lectures in San Francisco at the UFOCon conference. And Melinda will go through her list of people, her background, how she got in it. I will do the latest material on the efforts that are going now at the To the Stars, Tom DeLonge thing. And she will actually sort of identify and talk about some of the people that she's interacted with over the years that I was not aware of. The interview tonight is to highlight a new person that Melinda has made contact with. And this is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, person that I think we've interacted with or that the story involves. And I'm going to let Melinda now talk about how this happened, how she came in contact with this person, who the person is, and how this thing all unraveled. So I'll let you take it over, Melinda, and tell us, how did this thing happen, and who are we talking about?
As I was saying, I had recently an incredible fortuitous series of events that led to my meeting an individual very highly placed in this story that we've been following. And that was Jim Semivan, the co-founder and vice president of operations for To the Stars Academy, TSA. So, and it was quite a remarkable series of situations that started with a client of mine who came out on my UFO sighting tour, brought up during the tour that she was friends with some people that were friends of Jim Semivan's, and through them she had gotten to meet him, that they were coming to visit her in the near future, and that she had been in constant recent contact with him. And at that time I asked her, wow, is there a chance you'd be willing to ask him some questions for me? To which she said, yes. And she said, if it should come up why they're visiting, and, you know, well, dinner or breakfast or something, you know, if it felt right, she might ask him a few questions from me. And that's kind of where it ended. The next day after the tour, she had been in recent communication with him through emails and phone calls to finalize these plans for their trip. And she lives, without going into detail, on the East Coast. And at which point he had emailed her like some finalized plans and some final questions. while she was out of town visiting here in Sedona, Arizona, to which he said, where are you while you're out of town? You know, she had told him, you can email me, I'm going to be on vacation, but I will look for your emails. And he said at the end of a long email, by the way, where are you? And she responded, Sedona, Arizona. And he said, oh my goodness, I'm going there in a week, and a little over a week. And he said, wow, I'm going there, you know, this was all via email. And then said, is there anyone in Sedona you recommend I really talk to? And anything I should really see. He had been before, but not in years, and his wife had not been. And he said, anything new there that we should see, and anyone we should really talk to? And she said, yes, I highly recommend you go on this UFO sighting tour with this person by the name of Melinda Leslie. And she had responded that way to an email with him, of which he responded, oh, great, I'll contact her when I'm there. And that's where it ended. Then she told me the next day on her own, she took it upon herself to send him an additional email with my website, my phone number, my email, links to videos and things that I, you know, like information about me. And she thought she was doing me a favor to convince him why he should really come see me. And then again, it ended at that. And then when it came down to it, I thought he would be here for a week. The week almost went by, I hadn't heard anything. And I said, well, oh, well, either he didn't come, or he came and was too busy, or didn't care about meeting little old me, you know. And so, you know, whatever, it's okay. And then all of a sudden on last Saturday, the day before our Super Bowl Sunday, I came in to meet a tour to go out that night. And I had 3 couples, 6 people. Originally, I had 2 others that the last minute had canceled. And then one young couple that was supposed to go out with me was talking to this lady out inside the Center for New Age, where I am here in Sedona, and was talking to her. And I thought maybe she was another friend that had decided to go with him or something. So when I gathered everyone to give them instructions to use the restroom before we go, and to dress warmly and take care of any final sales, whatever, we meet outside at the end of the building. And this other woman was there, and I said, oh, have you decided to come with them? I don't have you in our booking system. I'm going to need to take you into the Center for New Age and have you entered in the, you know, our computer booking system. And she said, no, I don't think I'm going. Although my husband's upstairs in the bathroom, let me ask him, maybe he would want to. And she said, you're Melinda Leslie? And I said, yes. And she said, I believe a friend of ours went on your tour. And I hadn't put 2 and 2 together yet. And I said, oh. And she said, I think my husband wants to talk to you. And I said, all right. And I said, she goes, you might know who he is. And I said, okay. Well, you know, again, I was focused on the tour. My clients were waiting for me. And at that point, she said, well, he's up in the restroom. I said, well, who's your husband? And she said, Jim Semivan. And I just, you know, Grant almost fell over. And so I was like, he's here? And she said, yeah. And he's here now, you know? And she said, yes. And I'm like, oh my God. So he comes downstairs. She'd been talking to me at that point for just a little while, and said, well, he's a little skittish around UFO related people. So, you know, and I said, well, you've been talking to me, why don't you introduce me to him? And so when he came down, she did. And meanwhile, my other clients are coming back from having gone to use the restroom and getting warm clothes and etc. And they're kind of starting to gather around me. And him and I started talking. Our total talking length was, you know, 10 to 15 minutes, I think about 15 minutes. And my clients were just patiently waiting. But it was, and his wife kept pulling him away, saying, let her go, let her go. She's got she's got clients waiting. Honey, we can't keep her, you know. And I said, are you in town any more days? Can we get together? I would love to talk to you further. I have questions for you. I mean, I did like think fast, you know. And even though we talked a little bit there, he gave me some cursory stuff, you know, which I'll get into more in a moment. But at that point, you know, she was pulling him away, saying her clients are waiting. We can't keep her anymore. Come on, honey. You know, and I said, can I meet with you tomorrow? He says, well, we're kind of busy. Let me see. You know, maybe we'll have like a half hour or whatever. But then all of a sudden, his attitude changed a little, and he thought of something. He goes, you know what? There is something I really do want to ask you, and so I'll probably call you. You know, I'll call you in the morning. And then it ended at that. And then I went on my tour, and my clients on the tour were like, what is going on? Who was that? Out of the 3 couples, only the young couple knew a little bit, but they didn't even know much. They had seen a little bit of the news coverage. And but they were asking me. And I said, well, you know, the group behind the news coverage, this is like their director, you know, and explained it to him. And so I didn't know if he had already told me he might be busy the next day, but he would probably call me. And so when I woke up in the morning, of course, I was hoping he would call. Long story short, at about 9 in the morning on Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, I received a phone call from him. And he said, we'd like to meet you for lunch. And we agreed on a time and a place. I recommended a place. That's like one of my favorite little lunch places here in town. It's called Indian Gardens. It's up Oak Creek Canyon. It's really lovely. Soup, salad, sandwiches, you know. And so we agreed to meet. Now, I thought I'd be lucky if I got like half an hour with him, based upon him already saying he'd probably be busy. And I had no idea in a million years I was going to get as long as I did. We had talked for about 15 minutes that night, and the next day, from when I met him to when I quickly, upon leaving him, made my first phone call to you and others, meaning Grant and others, that it had been an additional 2 hours and 15 minutes. So all in all, I had about 2.5 hours to talk to him. And it doesn't even begin to describe it. That's a good question. I told him repeatedly, don't tell me anything you don't want me sharing. In other words, I was letting him know that I'd, you know, be sharing this. I said, don't tell me anything you don't want, you know, known, and anything you want private, or you can tell me beforehand if there's something that you don't want shared. And there were a few times he was guarded in what he said and kind of stopped himself. And then there were very few things that he said, this is just between us. So if he was preferencing some comments with this is just between us, he knew the other things were things that I was likely going to share. Overall, and he stressed, let me back up for a minute and give everyone an idea of kind of how the conversation progressed. It was the 15 minutes the day before was just kind of an overview, some basic things thrown back and forth. My clients were waiting. I was trying to be fast. He asked me a few things, and, you know, to tell you the truth, I'm not really clear on exactly what we discussed then, but it became insignificant compared to the next day, obviously. And then the next day when we met, the first thing he wanted to do, and I was grateful for this, he said, I want to hear all about you. And I said, well, I want to hear about you. And he said, okay, he'd go first with his background, you know. And so it kind of started with him going into his background professionally, the work he's done with the CIA over the years, his different positions. He said, look, you know, and I had told him I'd done some research online, but he said, here's some additional stuff that you may not hear from anyone else or online, or if you do hear from someone else, I want you to hear it first. But it was pretty straightforward, et cetera. You know, I don't think he'll mind my saying this. There was a 2 to 3 year period where he said he was the director of clandestine operations in the US for the CIA. And at times he answered directly to the director, and other times he answered to the assistant director. And at times he briefed the director on behalf of the assistant director, if I got my information straight on this. I did not take any notes. This was impromptu. I thought I was going to go in and have a good conversation with him. I did go in with about 5 questions I wanted answered. Those all got answered right away. and I never dreamt in a million years I'd be sitting here for another 2 hours, 20 minutes talking to him. So I did get my initial questions. As I started to say, he went into detail about his background, and he said he is currently retired officially, you know, from the CIA, but is under contract and still doing some contract operations for him. And as I said, at one time, he told me the title that he had during that period when he was the director of all clandestine operations in the U.S., but I fortunately do not remember the exact title. It was a title, though, that you wouldn't associate with that. You know, it was like, you know, operational, you know, it might have been like operational director, blah, 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 you know, whatever it was. It didn't instantly compute to that, but he said what I actually did was this, you know.
Okay.
And he was very forthcoming. And then from there, it progressed into my background. How did I get in the UFO subject? My background, without going into it here, is closely related to the beginning of the whole Bob Lazar story and a trip out to Area 51. He didn't know any of that. And so he was very interested, and how I found out that I was an abductee. So it progressed into all that. And then from there, I wanted to hear about his abduction experience. Now, this is one of those areas, you've already said it, Grant, so my saying that he's had an experience is something you've already mentioned in your announcements, correct? You know,
yeah.
That's something that's already out there. But this is one of those areas where the details he asked me not to share. It was traumatic. I will say this, a majority of the story that he was sharing with me, and his wife was sitting right there the whole time too, and so I got her account as well. The majority of the story was about the evidence they have for it. You know, given his background and his thinking and his, you know, work in the intelligence field, the evidence mattered significantly, and it's what helped to convince him that he had had an absolute real experience. But again, the details of that I'm not at liberty to go into, and I told him that I wouldn't. At that point, he asked me all about my abduction experiences. On my tours, I asked about it a lot, and I'm used to giving like a 20-minute to half-hour kind of breakdown on how I found out as an abductee and my initial experiences, the things as a kid, and when I've been taken with some other people. You know, I have a basic story. So I told him, I said, well, I'm used to sharing that. I get asked a couple of times a week. You know, I mean, I do tours almost every night, and probably 3 out of 5 nights, somebody will ask me. They've researched me online or something. So I'm not comfortable to talk about all the time, but I am used to it. And he had some good questions, and so we went a little bit into that. So we covered all that. From there, he then went into, once we've gotten background and his professional background, my background, both of us having abductions out of the way, feelings about abduction, you know, that kind of thing. And then from there, it progressed into, he said, I want to tell you all about TTSA, you know, and I said, well, yeah, I said, thank you, I want to hear about it. And so the next section was all about TTSA, which we'll get into here in a moment, I know. And after that, got into the group and the way they feel. It was the history of TTSA, the history of how DeLong got involved, the history of how we got involved. It went forward into how they feel, and what he kept calling the other group, which we'll get into that a little bit more, but those are the people doing the abduction research, and the consciousness research.
So how did he get
so we covered a lot of ground, and then as you know, and you can ask me about this later, but I know we're going to get into the fact that about an hour and a half into the discussion, he threw me a complete curveball and surprised me. He said, can I change? Do you want me to go ahead and say this now, Grant, since I started to?
Yeah, well, let's leave that for for the second section. We'll just that's the big one, the big surprise thing.
Yeah. Now, again, you guys, I want everyone to know I've had a heck of a week. I've been busy with work. I did not record this conversation. I did not take notes, and it was a lot of detail to remember. And I'm going to apologize to everyone in advance that what I have done to remember is, first off, that night, Grant, Lori, and Fenton and myself got together and talked about it and recorded that conversation, which I have in detail and taken some notes from. And then there were some other individuals, researchers and friends that I have spoke to, and some of them had really good, tough questions, and it helped me refresh my memory. But I want everyone to know this is going purely for memory, and I do apologize in advance that some details are lost in the shuffle. But this is where I said, Grant, ask me questions, and that'll help spur on my memory. And I have addressed certain parts repeatedly with some individuals privately, and so that has definitely helped me refresh my mind, you know. He went into, and I think here it's important to say, everyone, he had said repeatedly in the conversation that GrantCameron, you know, was 75 to 80% correct. And I'm not saying that to play at Grant or to play up anything to your listeners. That's an exact quote. So GrantCameron is 75 to 80% correct. And the only things that are wrong are a few minor details, and you know, we can correct them on the details, minor facts, you know. But the overall take was 75 to 80% correct. And I really wanted to know he said that. And so a lot of stuff I feel like I don't necessarily need to rehash everything Grant has said about this so far, because I'm 80% correct, you know. And now with that, went over a lot of that with me, a lot of the detail, and yet it's all just confirming what I'd been following. So it was exceptionally confirming to everything you've been saying. And I'm not saying that lightly. He had said this at least twice, I think even 3 times he brought this up. Well, I said, is there anything I can tell him right away? The only thing that really stuck in my head is he said, tell him I never briefed the president.
So we correct that.
Yeah, and he said, I never briefed the president. I was never in a position to brief the president. And he said, you know, that's just one thing that was a, you know, a detail. And he says, it's not really important in the overall of what he was saying, but I don't want him to think that I was ever in that position, you know.
Okay.
Lots of things. Here, I'll grab some notes, and not necessarily in any particular order, okay?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Okay. I had gone in, like I said, kind of with 5 questions. I said, what day or date is the next footage coming out? I'll go ahead and get into that.
Yep.
And I had heard through the grapevine, of course, that there was more footage. We discussed that. That there were documents and that there was metal and the scientific findings from that. So we went into all of this in great detail. So the first question I asked him is, what day or date is the next footage coming out? And he had said, and again, you guys, it wasn't like I had questions in front of me. It came up in the conversation. But again, so I'm going to hit a bunch of things here that aren't necessarily in order. They're just as I remembered, and I took some notes. He went on to say that they have another piece of gun camera footage. It is ready. That they realized they made some real mistakes the first time. They have listened to everybody's complaints and alternative views of the footage, and realize that they need to back this up with more evidence this time, so they can head that off at the pass, you know, so they can already have those answers in place. They have photo analysis experts that are being brought out with this. I did ask him who's the point man on the next story, and he said again it was Luis Elizondo again. And he said that they have this other piece ready to go, that they've dotted every I and crossed every T. They have their facts straight. They have their evidence straight. He said it'll have a lot more supporting evidence behind it. And he said that it should come out any day now. And I said, well, like in a week or 2 weeks, or, you know, by the end of the month. And he said, they're ready. They now have, they realized after the release of the last piece, they were going to release this one sooner. But the first thing that happened was, well, a couple of things. First off, there was Christmas and New Year's. Then there were a couple major political things going on. These gentlemen involved in this were all busy with things going on in their lives. And then he said we wanted to make sure we did our homework. We had our evidence in place so that we could head all those questions off of the pass, as I just said. So he said we really wanted to make sure the evidence was backing up, and we had supportive paperwork, supportive evidence, the photo analysis work done, this kind of thing. And he said we've done all that. And he said we worked very hard to get that all done. He said we've now gone to the New York Times again, but he said they have their own agenda, their own schedule. They did, the New York Times had told to the Stars Academy that they had sold, he gave me a number of, you know, months or something. I want to say 12 to 18 months, something, I can't remember his exact number, as far as this was the most newspapers, you know, the paper had sold, you know, and their biggest, you know, seller, even more so than any of the major political stories in the presidency and etc. So he said they told us this sold more papers than anything. So of course they're extremely interested in, you know, running another story, but they're in the midst of their own agenda. He didn't state this, but the way he said it led me to think he was referring, of course, to the political agenda that for the Times, you know, and he said, so now kind of the ball's in their court, you know, and he said, we're hoping it comes out sooner rather than later, and whether it was going to be in the next couple of weeks or not. And I said by the end of the month, and he said he really hoped it would be before the end of the month. But he says it's out of our hands regarding that timing, and we are going to the New York Times first because of the established, you know, relationship with them. But then they're ready with Elizondo to hit the news, etc., and all the supporting evidence that he says that they have for it.